In this video, we're going to talk about Quincy's Active Directory integration. We're going to go over the options available, and then we're going to talk about how you configure each of those options. The options available are no integration, user-level integration, or group-level integration. It's pretty important to understand the difference between user-level and group-level integration in terms of how it affects the actual integration and administration of the users. So we'll explore that in some meaningful detail. So let's go into Quincy now and play with these various modes and explore how they affect the interaction. So we're in Quincy. We're logged in as the administrator. We currently have no Active Directory integration set up. So let me go show you how I know that. If I come into the admin window, I go into System Administration and then Config File. And you see Use AD or Use Active Directory is set to 0. That means no Active Directory integration at all is at play. 1 would be user-level Active Directory integration, and 2 would be group-level Active Directory integration. Anytime I change this, if I want to go to 1, for example, I would need to click Save Changes. Save Changes, it's going to now tell me I need to restart my listener in order for the changes to be active. So one thing to clue you in on relative to this video is we're going to have a lot of stopping the listener and restarting it, and I will skip over those parts so you don't have to sit and spend the time. But nonetheless, that will happen frequently in this video. Before I actually start to do that and stop and restart the listener, I want to show you one other thing that's of relevance to the Active Directory integration. And to do that, we come to System Values, and we scroll all the way down here to Active Directory Information. This is where you can key in your Active Directory integration, and it will pull from this as a default. Most of the time you can override these options, but there are some places in the tool, and I'll show you those, where it's going to exclusively look here. So if this is not filled out and filled out correctly, your Active Directory integration simply won't work. If you have filled this out and you want to know if your Active Directory integration is working, there are 2 places you can go. You can go into Groups and then click this button, New Active Directory Groups, and it's going to load the groups from your Active Directory. And if you click here and you see all the various groups, then your information is properly populated. The other place you can go is if you have a license that supports it, you can go to Custodians. And in Custodians, you can actually do a full import of all your Active Directory users. So if I were to click this, then you can see it's pulling from that spot. And if I click Connect, it's going to connect to Active Directory and pull in all the information there. So I'm just going to do that. This actually takes a while. So while it's going, I'm going to pause the video. Okay, so it just pulled in all my Active Directory information, and you can see here's just basically everything we're getting. But nonetheless, the point I was making was there are those 2 places where you can confirm whether or not your Active Directory integration is set up correctly. So now let's go and start to do our tests. And before we do that, actually, let me explain how these different modes work, because they'll affect how we test them. When I set this to level 1, which is user level integration, how this is going to work is what's going to happen is at the login screen, and frankly, I won't see the login screen anymore. When Quincy is asked to activate, if you will, it will ask the browser who is logged in. And the browser will pass the user's credentials to Quincy. And in user-level authentication, Quincy will take those credentials and go check the users. And if it finds a user that has the matching credentials, it will log them in as that user. If it doesn't find a user that has those credentials, it will say, nope, there's no user here, you don't have permissions, you can't log in. So to test user level authentication, you need to make sure you have users properly set up. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's add a user that has my domain credentials, which is T. Lee Healy. First name Tim, last name Lee Healy. And we'll go ahead and save that. We don't need a password. It won't really be relevant here, frankly. And then let's go and give me some rights. Let's do, will just give me, well, actually, let me go check my roles here for a second. Well, we want something that has not extensive permissions. This is desk eTest. It's got the access to the desktop, but it's got no widget, so basically a blank desktop. So let's go ahead and use that one. We have to, again, edit this, so let's go ahead and edit this, and we'll assign that role, that desk eTest, and save that. And we'll actually, while we're at it, let's give me one case. Make sure it takes effect. There we go. All right, now I'm going to restart my listener and I'm going to meet you again at the login page. Okay, I restarted my listener and I'm at the login page now. And you can see it's the normal login page. But if I were using user level Active Directory integration, I would never ever even come to this page because my password doesn't matter. Instead, I would go to the root directory, or if you set up a custom URL, the custom URL directory. And so I'm just going to hit OK, and you're going to see it's going to automatically log me in. I didn't have to enter my credentials. I didn't have to do anything. It just went and said, oh, browser, who is this? Oh, T. Lee Healy. Is there a T. Lee Healy user? Yes, we created him. And go ahead and log him in. So I'm going to fast forward through the login part so we don't have to sit and wait, and we'll meet at the desktop. Okay, we logged in. We can see we're T. Lee Healy. And just as we expected, we have a totally blank desktop because that was the only role that was assigned to T. Lee Healy, and we should have access to one case. And there we go. Perfect. So not only did user level authentication work, but this is effectively single sign-on as well because the person never actually needs to even log in. So now we're going to go back into Quincy as the administrator. And we're going to try group level authentication as well. Okay, we've logged back in as the administrator. Now let's go back into our admin panel, and we're going to reset to to group level Active Directory authentication. Let's go into the config file, and again we're going to move this from 0 to 2 now. And let's go save that. And again, it's going to ask us to restart. Now, before we go ahead and restart, let me explain how this one works. In group level authentication, it's similar to user level. When the user hits the sort of Quincy activation page, Quincy asks the browser, who is logged in, who's authenticated. The browser says, oh, here you go, it's T. Lee Healy. Then Quincy takes T. Lee Healy and it goes to Active Directory. And it says, what groups is T. Lee Healy a member of? And it finds all those groups, and then it takes those groups back to Quincy, and it says, are any of these groups in Quincy, and do they have access to Quincy? And if the answer is yes, the user gets logged in as one of those groups. So to make this work, we're going to need to create a group that T. Lee Healy has access to. So let's go into groups and let's go do that. We're going to go ahead and click our new Active Directory group. Give it a second to load. And then we need to know what groups T. Lee Healy has access to. So I happen to know SVN read access is one of the groups that I have access to, so I'm just going to go ahead and use that one. And you'll see it's going to create a new Quincy group. Let's go ahead and refresh. There's our new group, and let's give this guy rights. We're going to give him Quincy Power user rights, or actually we'll give him investigator rights. So now when I log in, instead of having the blank screen I had before, I'm going to have whatever rights investigator has, which I think actually are quite extensive. Let's just quickly check. Investigator has access to, basically a whole bunch of different views and more or less all the different widgets. So, but he doesn't, interestingly enough, he doesn't have access to everything, but a fair amount. So it will be a pretty healthy view into Quincy. Okay, now to make this test complete, I'm going to go ahead and remove this user. And what we're going to find is that, in fact, the login process is going to add that user back in. And why is this? Because the way it works is when Quincy asks, hey, who's logged into the browser, it first checks to see, does that user exist? If the user does not exist, it creates the user, and then it goes to Active Directory and says, do any of these groups exist in Quincy? So it's going to create the user, then it will check the groups that I'm a member to, and if any of those groups exist, it will log me in under that group. So I'm going to go ahead and restart my listener, and I will meet you again at the login screen. Okay, we're back at the login screen. Again, we've got the administrator information in here. But we're going to go to the root of Quincy, and we should have the single sign-in experience. Here it goes. It's logging us in. Again, it's saying, who is this person? Teely Healy. Okay, let's go to Active Directory and see if he's an Active Directory member and what groups. It's doing all the logic I just took you through. So again, I'm going to just pause and fast forward through the login experience, and then I'll meet you again at the main screen. Okay, we're back at the login screen. And again, we're going to do the same thing we've done in the past, and we're just going to go ahead and log in at the root level. And I'm again going to save you the process of watching this build, and I'll just jump ahead to the part where we're logged in, and we'll see the view we've got and who we're logged in as. Okay, so we've logged in. We can see that we have access to most widgets, but not all of them, which is what we expected. We're logged in as Teely Healy, even though, remember, we deleted that user. So clearly Quincy has created that user as we would have expected. Because, again, Teely Healy, or me in this case, was part of a group that was in Quincy. And therefore, since we've got this group single sign-on mode or Active Directory mode, it said who's logged in the browser, Tim Lee Healy. Go to Active Directory. What groups is Tim Lee Healy part of? Are any of those groups in Quincy? If they are, log me in as one of those groups and create the Teely Healy user. And so all those steps happened effectively automatically. Now, the one last thing I want to show you is what we call user switching. So let's imagine you have Active Directory enabled, as we do here. But for some reason, let's say, for example, I'm the administrator, and I want to be able to log in as the administrator. Well, that becomes problematic because I have to log in to get on my computer because that's the work rule. And the administrator is not my username, so I'm going to always be logging in as Teely Healy. Well, we have what we called, again, user switching. So let's just click on here and I'll show you that. Okay, you can see you have the change user option here. And if you go ahead and type administrator and then ABC123, which is the wrong password. If I click here, it's going to say authentication failed, but let's go ahead and put the right password, which gives an exclamation mark at the end. and then we're going to go ahead and change user, you're going to see it's going to log me out and log me back in as the administrator, even though I'm in Active Directory mode. So the switching user allows you as a, let's say Tim Lee Healy in this case, to move into the administrator role, which might not be your normal role, as long as you know the username and password of the administrator. So I'm going to pause the video again and zoom forward till the login is done, and I'll see you again there. Okay, so we've logged in, and you can see now we're administrator. And let's wait for it to finish up this stuff. And it's worth actually going into the admin panel really quickly and seeing in the users how the T. Lee Healy user got created. So we can log back out of that now. And then let me show you how to restore. If you want to restore back to the original user, you again need to know that user's name. So in this case, it was our T. Lee Healy user. Type that there and click restore, and that will bring you back to the original user. And then you can ignore the change user going forward and just continue to use the T. Lee Healy user. Anyway, that's Active Directory. Those are the 3 modes we support. Again, no Active Directory is 0. 1 is user level, and 2 is group level. Hope this is helpful and that you're successful utilizing these features. Thank you very much.